In this presentation, we're going to be looking at the family Percidae, the perch, probably one of the most fabulous families of fish in North America. This family will include the walleye and sauger, the yellow perch, and the darters. I hope you will recall that in the family Percidae, we identify them by having separate spiny and soft dorsal fins. These dorsal fins may be fairly close together in some members of this family, but the membrane is not continuous from one to the next. The second characteristic that we use to identify these fish are the two anal spines. Now, in the families that have 3 or more anal spines, temperate basses and sunfishes, the spines, even though they may be short, are very stout and robust, sharp. You'll notice them. Cyanidae, the drums, have 2 anal spines, and they too will be very stout and obvious. In Percidae, if you look at walleye or yellow perch, the 2 anal spines are very stout and very noticeable. By the time you get down into the darters, darters are small fish, so those anal spines might be very slender and somewhat flexible. You're really not going to feel them and feel the sharpness. If you get into the tessellated darter, the one darter that has 1, it is a very thin splint. About the only way you could tell it was a spine is by looking at it under magnification to determine that it's one single solid element and not the right and left halves and articulated down its length or branched, such as rays are. So, aside from walleye and yellow perch, we kind of infer the 1 or 2 anal spines on these fish. It can be very difficult to determine at times. Percidae are another family which evolved in Laurasia. Consequently, we find it throughout the northern hemisphere. We will use that term holarctic in its distribution, meaning it is found throughout the subarctic regions, very cool water fish, typically. You'll notice they are widespread throughout Europe and Asia, and of course through North America. But the interesting thing is that we don't see great diversity in Europe and Asia. It's predominantly the zander, which is very similar to the walleye, and the yellow perch, the river perch, which is very similar to the yellow perch. In North America, we have had the proliferation of the subfamily Ethiostomini, which are all the darters. So we will have the walleye, the sauger, the yellow perch, but then we get all these wonderful darters that are a glory to behold. Percidae do have tremendous value, both as commercial fish and sport fish. During the 19th century and into the 20th century, the Great Lakes had a tremendous commercial fishery for walleye and yellow perch, with many, many tons coming out of there annually. In most American waters in the lower Great Lakes states, yellow perch and walleye tend to be reserved as sport fish. In the upper Great Lakes, there are some minor commercial fisheries remaining on these fish, and Canada still operates commercial fisheries on these fish. But as a sport fish, they are tremendous, generating many billions of dollars of economic value every year as people go fishing for them or hire charters. But walleye and yellow perch, very notable sport fish. Sauger to a lesser degree. None of the darters get large enough that they have any significance commercially, although ecologically they do have value and are appreciated by many people. A very well-known case study from the 1970s was the Tennessee Valley Authority and the Army Corps of Engineers were going to build a dam on the Tellico River in Tennessee. And then that project was halted, completely shut down, because of the presence of a small, rare darter species, the snail darter. So if you get your hands on a fish that has the large ctenoid scales, very obviously scaled fish, but separate spiny and soft dorsal fins and 1 or 2 anal spines, take a look at the mouth. Well, first off, take a look at the fish. If it's bigger than 6, 7, 8 inches, you're probably going to have a perch or a walleye. Darters don't get very large. Log perch might hit 7 or 8 inches. I've seen a few larger. But generally, if we're looking at a small fish, we're going to look at the mouth. The mouth will be large, reaching well to the middle of the eye or the rear edge of the eye, plus the gape. How wide does the mouth open? These fish will be able to open their mouth very wide to take in smaller fish. Or is the mouth very petite, a small mouth, barely reaching the front of the eye, if at all, and then the gape, how wide it can open its mouth, is very small. These fish feed on small invertebrates. So separate your fish into one of the two categories. If your fish is small and has that petite mouth and a small gape, it will be one of the darters. We'll come back to those in a moment. If your fish has the large mouth and a large gape, check the jaws. Does it have really well-developed, prominent caniform teeth? Or are the canines absent? It'll have bristly little teeth, but not those big chompers. This is predominantly how we're going to make our separation of yellow perch from walleye. When I was in college and doing some larval fish work, I ran into a problem of very late spawning walleye and very early spawning yellow perch. You take one of these fish that's 3/4 of an inch or an inch long, and they look exactly the same. Usually based on time of the year, I could tell, if it was earlier, it was walleye. If it was later, it was yellow perch. And I had these little 3/4 inch long larvae that I had. They were practically identical. And if you open the mouth on them, even at that size, if you open the mouth, you could see these caniform teeth forming, these canine teeth of the walleye. Fascinating. So, if your perkid has a large mouth and a large gape, but no well-developed canines, it's the yellow perch, Perca flavescens.
Should you have a perkid with that very large mouth, large gape, and it does have canines, you can pretty much be certain you have a walleye. The extreme western portion of the state, Allegheny waters, you may run into a sauger, but unlikely. So anyway, those canines on the perkid will tell you you have a walleye. Additionally, for identification, you'll have this single dark blotch in the posterior spiny dorsal fin. The last two rays, the membrane in there will be completely black. And also the lower lobe of the caudal fin, that lower tip of the caudal, will be white. The yellow perch is a very distinguished looking fish. It's very common, highly recognizable by many people. You'll get this yellowish, brassy colored fish that will have 6 or 7, 8, somewhere through there, of these very large, distinct stripes. Now, these are so well known and so distinct that many times when people see this, they will want to call them perch stripes if they're on other fish, or you buy a lure that has these heavy stripes, it'll be a perch finish lure. Aside from the yellowish color and the distinct perch stripes, what you'll notice is if you look at the posterior spiny dorsal, there will be a black spot, and this will extend up through the 4 or 5 membranes. It extends up into the fin. It's quite distinct from the walleye's dark spot, which just completely fills the last 2 membranes.
An interesting aspect of its spawning, which I would like to point out, is that it will spawn over brush or weed beds, but structure. It needs structure. And it will lay these egg masses, which form these big sort of zigzag accordion masses. They're called skeins. You will often see these in the spring, through April or early May. I can remember pulling gill nets early in the year and just having them covered with these egg masses, and you end up ankle deep in the boat in yellow perch eggs. And here we have the walleye, Sander vitreus. This fish is evidence that God loves us and wants us to be happy. Keep in mind that walleye will have very well-formed canine teeth. They'll also have a very broad gap between the spiny and soft dorsal. That's a Sander characteristic. The cheeks are scaleless. Typically they're bronze. You may see some vertical barring on the sides at times. The lower lobe of the caudal is light or white. Notice on this illustration, the bottom illustration here, that they did not draw that in. The artist must have thought that was just a bad specimen or something, didn't realize that that was a more uniform characteristic. Walleye up to 16, 17 inches are common. They will easily get up into the 30s of inches, and 10 or 12 pounds is not necessarily uncommon. But a glorious, glorious fish. God help me, but I love this fish. This is a pretty typical coloration of walleye. This sort of brassy bronze color, bronze on the back, brassy on the side, white belly. Yeah, this is what you'll see most of the time on walleye. So here's a smaller walleye. Notice the white tip on the lower lobe of the caudal fin. The black spot is just in the last two membranes of the spiny dorsal. Now, one thing that's interesting on this is you can see some vertical barring. When you get vertical barring on walleye, they'll have 10 or 12 bars or so. And typically these are fish that will have come out of fairly clear, shallow water, something where there's some contrast, light and dark, light and shadow contrast. But you will see this occasionally, that barring. Much less distinct than what you see on a yellow perch. At this point, we are going to take a look at those perchids that have a small mouth, a very petite mouth, and a small gape, the fish that we'll call the darters.
So you've got that small perch, small mouth, small gape. You have one of the fish that we'll consider a darter. And if you look at its abdomen, instead of having a normally scaled abdomen, there will be a row of particularly large scales right down the center line of that abdomen. If you see that row of large star-shaped scales, sometimes these can be absent, I'll point that out, but you get this row of large star-shaped scales, or almost a naked strip there, you're in the genus Percidae. So you have determined that you have a Percidae. It's a small perch with a small mouth, and it has that abdominal row of large scales. If you get one that has these alternating stripes, a long heavy stripe, a short thin stripe, a long heavy stripe, that's going to be the hallmark of a log perch. That really stands out. Nothing else is going to really be like that at all. Now, the fish does have this non-protractile mouth, but the snout draws up into this little point, this little, button nose, a little pig snout, pig nose on there. The name Percidae caprotes, somebody thought it looked like a little goat nose, but hey, go figure. But between the little pointy nose and the alternating stripes, you'll know you have a log perch. Now, our other Percidae that we may run into is Percidae maculata, the black-side darter. Again, a very distinguishable darter. It will have this row of big black blotches down the side. It's not a black stripe down the side, but a row of these big blotches, and then it will have this black teardrop underneath the eye that is very, very distinct.
When I recognize a fish as a log perch, what's going to jump out in my mind will be the vertical bars down the side, the pig nose, and quite often a very dark caudal spot. Notice the vertical bars and the pig snout.
I'm under the impression that the black-side darter is expanding its range more. This could be a function of climate change. I would used to only get one extremely rarely, But now just about any time I'm up there on the lower Chittenango, I will take multiple specimens of these. And again, those large blotches down the side, just nothing is comparable to that. And then again, that dark teardrop under the eye will let you know you have black-side darter, Percidae maculata.
If you have a small darter whose abdomen is normally scaled, look at the mouth. Is it just a fairly normal terminal mouth? And if so, does the head look rather pointed and the mouth is centered on the profile of the fish? You're probably looking at a fantail darter. Another aspect of the fantail darter is that the spiny dorsal is significantly shorter than the soft dorsal, the fantail darter. Now, if it has a complete lateral line and the head is very rounded rather than being pointed, that means the mouth is low on the profile. That will point us to either a tessellated darter or a green-side darter. Now the tessellated, this is a very common darter, very hardy. You'll find it in a very wide range of habitats. Does like sandy bottoms, but again, hardy. I found them in lakes and ponds even. So your tessellated will be a lighter brown looking darter, and it will have these dark X's or W's, very finely scribed, like with a fine tip pen following the lateral line. It will have some faint X's and W's, hatch marks across the body, but that very distinct line down of X's down its lateral line. The green side darter also has that rounded head. The mouth is low on the profile, but it will have these big broad W's or V's below the lateral line. Very, very abundant. And generally this is a dark darter, if not flat out green. During the spring and summer, those V's or W's will just be bright green in spawning condition. Many keys will point to the anal spines. The tessellated darter is our only percid, our only common percid with one anal spine. And the green side will have two. But again, this is, if you remember me saying, this is very difficult to discern. You'll probably need a hand lens to identify that rather than identify it by feel. This illustration shows a male fantail darter on top and a female below. There can be a fairly wide range of coloration in these fish. I've taken them from where they're almost solid black to very light tan with almost longitudinal fine black marks down the body. But if again, you will notice, recall rather, that this fish does have the incomplete lateral line. The head is very pointed with the mouth centered on the body. And its dorsal fin is almost half the height of the soft dorsal fin. The male that you see above will have little beads or rounded tips to the dorsal fin. Male fantails, well, fantails will spawn on the underneath side of rocks, so the males will actually use that dorsal fin to brush the underneath side of the rocks. They're egg mimics, the little rounded tips, so this will get the female to spawn there. It'll help induce her to spawn. Here we have a very characteristic male fantail darter. You will see that mouth on a pointed head. The mouth is about centered on the head, but look at that dorsal fin, only about half the height of the spiny dorsal is only about half the height of the soft dorsal, and we know this is a male from those rounded tips, the egg mimics that it will have there. Here we see a female fantail darter. You really can't get the idea of the height of her spiny dorsal because it's laying down, but typical little sharp tips there because they don't have the egg mimics. But look at that mouth. Very pointed head. Mouth is centered on the body. A tessellated darter, very light sandy colored darter, light tan. It'll have little dark hatch marks, X's or so across the body, and following the lateral line will be a very distinct row of dark X's. Here's a good looking tessellated darter. Notice that light body color with the little dark hatch marks and dots across it, the dark X's and W's down the lateral midline. And generally just think of that as a sand camouflage. Greenside darters are a fairly robust darter. You will see them up to maybe 4 inches. They will typically be from a dark green to a chartreuse green. Remember, they have this rounded head, mouth is low on the body. There is a funny little bump on the tip of the premaxillary, which usually will stand out. And the dark V's or W's below the lateral line. Here is a very vivid and beautiful greenside darter. This is a male as he's approaching spawning condition. Notice the rounded head, the mouth low on the body. It does have a complete lateral line. This one, you can really make out the dark V's or W's, again, how they lie below the lateral line. And here is one last picture of a greenside darter. This is much more common coloration, the dark green. You really can't see the heavy V's or W's below the lateral line. And there will be these broad bands, these broad bars that will often mask it when the coloration is deep like this. But that is the last of our darters. I love me them darters.
I need to wrap up the family of Percidae with something of a dishonorable mention. This is the Eurasian ruff, also known as the river ruff, or just simply the ruff. This is a non-native fish which was transported to North America in the ballast water of freighters that have take ore to Europe and fill with water for ballast, and then they come over and discharge that water. The ruff has spread more extensively through the upper Great Lakes, so we really do not have much of a presence of ruff in New York State at this time yet. This guy's a little bit strange for Percidae in the fact that for a percid, he does have a continuous a continuous spiny and soft dorsal fin. He is very strongly tenoid scales, sort of a light brown with speckles over him. They only get about 4 or 5 inches long, and they are horrid little beasties. They spawn all summer long. They're very prolific, so there's lots of them out there. They feed heavily on fish, eggs, and larvae. So this is, in any given habitat, as far as invaders go, this is going to be a number 2 to the round goby for being a pain in the patoot and the ecological damage it could wreak. I highly doubt that we'll collect any of these, and like I said, to the best of my knowledge, it's unlikely you'll run into these in New York yet. If you do, probably Lake Ontario waters.